I'm just curious. What is the opposite of toxic empathy? Is it like sort of like positive hate, or like what is? I'm just trying to like make heads and tails of this. I gotta say. Hello and welcome to In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy. And before we get into this episode, I just want to ask you, Marcus, how's Elon Musk's so-called civilizational suicide going for you?
You know, I think I might be on the other side of it. I survived a weekend of one family discussing the Palestine and Israel conflict, so I think I'm okay. Overall.
That demands a lot of...
It was as pleasurable as it sounds, Nora, actually, yes.
What we really want to talk about in this episode is this wild conversation that's been going on on the right around what, Elon Musk and Vance and other people have been calling sort of toxic empathy or suicidal empathy.
Yeah. I thought this was an oxymoron when he first brought me the topic.
No,
it is a real thing in this sublime world we live in.
Yeah. We're here. But, I think we also want to acknowledge that there is a lot of demand on people's empathy right now, right? Like there's a lot to care about. There are a lot of intersecting crises. There are a lot of things that we are having to watch unfold, often on social media. People are regularly referring to the idea of the onslaught, right, of news or crisis. So like, how are we supposed to allocate our care to all of these different things and our empathy and our emotional resonance with all these things? And why is J.D. Vance mad at the Pope that we feel empathetic about these things?
J.D.'s a complex guy, I've come to know. But, at least this Pope is, as of our recording time, still alive. So there's that. Anyhow, I got to say, though, it just seems so strange, right, that this is coming from... and not. I want to be careful. This is not all religious folks are all Christians here in America, but I mean, it's certainly coming from a plurality. It seems in terms of, them essentially sort of laundering selfishness and dehumanization through this like sort of religious context that, the moral way to go about things is to just not care about other people, and I don't get that.
Right. And I think it resonates with these broader shifts in sort of what American Christianity is and how it's related to the political dominant class that, I think has been explored in a lot of recent books.
Certainly.
I think it's interesting. So what are we actually getting into? What's happening here? So I think what we're going to try and do today is first kind of dive into the deep end of what this recent debate about toxic empathy has been, try and get some sort of footing in this discourse, if you will.
Yes.
But then I think try and move backwards in time to trace a bit of America's sort of seeming obsession with empathy and where it's taking us and where it maybe has led us astray. And also two important questions of like, is empathy even good? Is it the goal here?
Right.
And sort of, if empathy is one of the sort of like affects of living in the meanwhile, like what does it do to us? And what does it ask of us?
I'm just curious, what is the opposite of toxic empathy? Is it like sort of like positive hate, or like what is? I'm just trying to like make heads and tails of this. I gotta say, it actually reminded me somewhat of, I think about a decade ago, there was this thing called the prosperity gospel that was popularized in the Christian church, where it was essentially God wants you to be rich. And I have to say, like, I am a lapsed atheist, so my knowledge of the Christian tradition isn't what it used to be growing up. But I do recall like Jesus being somebody who was like, feed, clothe, help the poor. Also maybe care. I know this was gendered language, but like care for your brother, what have you, as you would of yourself. And so it seems like there's been this pattern, if you will, right, of sort of giving a spiritual hue In the case of the prosperity gospel, it was giving a spiritual hue to selfishness and greed. And it seems in this particular case, it is sort of resurfacing, just giving a spiritual hue to outright selfishness and tribalism, I'd say, right?
Yes, that's such a good point. That's a really good point. And it also marks, I think, this remarkable journey in terms of conservative thought in the U.S. You know, if you think back to the 90s when it was sort of all about compassionate conservatism, right? And
now that was an oxymoron, I gotta say.
100%, but at least they were trying to pretend to be compassionate, right?
Yes.
And now like the jig is up. We're just openly not only declaring that we don't care about people, but we're saying to care about people is going to bring about the downfall of civilization,
Right.
according to Elon Musk, who's well known for his grasp on civilization. So a couple of shout outs before we get into this.
Yes.
First of all, huge shout out to Julia Carey Wong, who wrote this incredible deep dive on Elon Musk and the war on empathy that appeared in The Guardian.
Yeah, brilliant piece. If folks haven't seen it, I absolutely suggest that they read it.
Yes, and we will put all this in the show notes, but just a really expertly researched piece of journalism. And then we're also going to play some clips with permission from an excellent conversation between Julia Carey Wong and Paris Marx, who's the host of the amazing podcast Tech Won't Save Us.
I actually started working on the piece like a week before Elon did that Joe Rogan appearance, because I had started to see him and others on social media saying negative things about empathy. There was one like tweet that the Babylon Bee guy shared where he was quoting Nietzsche positively. Nietzsche in certain hands, I think, has a track record of like not being great. And so I was kind of like, that's curious. And I had started to see also that there were folks on the Christian right that were talking about empathy in a strange way after this very high profile interaction at the service at the National Cathedral for Trump's inauguration.
Huge shout outs to those who have tackled this subject with the kinds of rigor and sanity that have allowed us to muddle through it.
Yes. And rigor and sanity do still exist in 2025. So that is.
I mean, some days.
Touche.
Okay. So to start us off, Marcus, are you ready to channel your inner theater kid and do some dramatic reading aloud?
Oh yeah, this is. Buckle up your seatbelts for some verbal sadism here. We're about to. You had to listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, which I
did.
My God,
It was 3 hours long.
Lord, you are in need of some hard liquor, I gotta say. So anyway.
Yeah, and I think the worst question I'm going to ask you on this podcast this week is: do you want to read the lines of Elon Musk or Joe Rogan?
So a megalomaniac or an imbecile? Well, I guess I'll take the megalomaniac. I don't know. So
All right.
I'll go with Musk here.
All right, you start us off then.
All right, here's Musk. I mean, there's this guy who's great. God Sad.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine. He's been on the podcast a bunch of times.
Yeah, he's awesome. And he talks about, basically suicidal empathy. Like if there's so much empathy that you actually suicide yourself.
Yeah.
So that we've got civilizational suicidal empathy going on. And it's like, I believe in empathy. Like I think you should care about other people, but you need to have empathy for civilization as a whole and not commit to a civilizational suicide.
I mean, also don't let somebody use your empathy against you so they can completely control your state and then do an insanely bad job of managing it and never get removed.
The fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy, the empathy exploit. They are exploiting a bug in Western civilization, which is the empathy response. Oh my God, I think I need just a palette of my mind.
You do a very good Elon.
Appreciate that. I've had some practice.
Okay,
yeah.
So the empathy exploit, the empathy mind virus.
I just have to make a note, right? That this is the richest man in the world in Elon, and this is, well, until recently, right, the number one sort of podcaster in the United States in Joe Rogan. And this is an actual exchange of theirs, right?
Yes.
I mean, this is
That probably millions of people are listening to.
Right. And just absorbing, right, it, like with unconsciously. And I'm like, what, like truly, where do we live in this moment in time that this is like, that this isn't just, I mean, I've had better conversations at a bar in Vashon Island, like, 5 rum and cokes in. I mean, that was last week, but still, I mean, my God.
Yeah. And, like, Musk is so rich.
Yes.
It would cost him nothing to even pretend to be empathetic and win probably a lot of votes and support to his side.
Right.
Like, the guy could like drop change on the sidewalk basically and like appear to be empathetic. It doesn't cost him anything.
Yeah, I think this, like, I mean, it also underscores, you probably, not probably, you know this better than I do, but I know there have been studies that show, like, depending on how much money you have, like the incremental increase in money, it decreases your empathy. And I mean, I think this is case in point, right? I mean, like he is the final boss, right? When it comes to a wealthy person, right? He has all the money in the world, literally almost. And you see what it has done to this, in terms of his like idea of compassion and just care for other people. Like he literally he has nothing to worry about, right? I mean, literally, like he can stop right now in terms of the game of capitalism. You won, right? You can just go out and be like a modern day Mother Teresa if he wanted to, and this is what he chooses to do and chooses to discuss. And it's like, it's interesting in terms of toxic, when people talking about toxic empathy and the dehumanization of it, and it's almost as if he's gotten to this point in terms of wealth where he has completely just it has eradicated empathy from his mindset, right? And it's, I mean, maybe maybe the whole, in some ways, the whole gospel of being rich, like it leads inevitably to this rage against toxic empathy because you have no empathy left, I guess, once you've done everything you could to make as much money as possible.
It's the like billionaire chicken and the egg problem. It's like, are they billionaires because they lack empathy, or like, do they lack empathy because that's what helped them become billionaires?
Right.
But at least other billionaires have to like seem to feel some public pressure to like pretend to care about other people. But I can
name them on one finger, maybe.
Yeah.
But
but I'm interested in what he's trying to cultivate politically here as a position, but also what is allowing him to say these things in public and for it to be even remotely okay.
Yeah. I'll say, right, I mean, in terms of your point of like the strategy behind it, it's right. If you end up creating sort of not even a mass movement of folks who view empathy as toxic, but just enough people, right? Where it's like you have it where like people don't care about the LGBTQIA plus community. They don't care about what's going on with immigrants. They don't care about what's going on with trans folks. They don't care about what's going on with black folks, right? Mm-hmm. You're able then to pass all these policies and, I mean, not even pass policies, but just commit inhumane treatment to people without there being much of a fuss, right? And I think we're continuing to see more and more of that, right? And so I think ultimately, right, I mean, that seems to be the end game, which is horrific, right? I mean, like...
Right. Yeah, it's really scary. And it leads us down some really scary roads towards, the kinds of social thinking that has in the past led to genocide, for example, right? And I think part of what is happening here is an effort to justify positions that they want to take without them being called dehumanizers or or being bothered by that, right? So if you look at so much of the successful liberal opposition to Trump 1.0, it was moments like the kids in cages, right? Where there was this like huge moral outrage. And then everyday Republicans were having to answer the question of like, are you seriously okay with this, right? And like, it seems like now Trump 2.0 is like, yeah, seriously, we are okay with this. and here's the moral justification for why.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's literally like inhumanity brought by like Madison Avenue in the sense of like, let's try to spin this in such a way
Yeah.
that people can accept it and accept it as normal, right? And
Yeah.
and that to me, I mean, that's, with all that is going on, right? I mean, I think it foundationally goes back to this, right? It goes back to the fact that you have so many people who just don't care, right? I mean, this isn't even self-interest at work. This is just like cruelty.
Yes.
In terms of them trying to sort of mass produce cruelty in our society.
Yeah. I mean, and, we've talked a lot over the last, 6 months or so about, manufactured consent, but this is part of the manufacture of consent for cruelty, right? And I think if you look at the first 100 days of the Trump administration, like so much of it is this really interesting shift towards this anti-empathy politics,
Right.
that literally starts day one of the Trump administration. So,
Well, and then, and to your point, right? I mean, the rejection, right, of even the call to empathy, right? I should know the priest's name, and forgive me that I do not. But when it was either the day of inauguration or the day after, and she's trying to call them in, so to speak.
In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families. Some who fear for their lives.
I think J.D. Vance is giving like this weird look to his wife, who's like, I am not.
she's like, I'm not making eye contact with you.
Right. And then, all that Trump can say afterwards when, when members of the press talk to him he's like, well, what did you think about it? I thought it was terrible, basically. Right. And it's like the fact that there is no, again, I mean, the fact that there is no time even or space for self-reflection, right, are to just have a level of awareness of like, okay, like I do actually I'm powerful enough that I can ease the pain in people's lives, right? Instead, it's like I am powerful enough that I can cause more harm to people, right?
Right. Yeah. What she's saying there is so basic, but
that's what I thought about.
She's basically like, people are scared right now. I hope you spare them a thought, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I went to Catholic church or Catholic school, excuse me, most of my life. And like the one thing that I did learn from that time period, right, or accepted at least from that time period, was essentially that message, right? Ultimately, of that the weak need to be taken care of, right?
Yes. I mean, I think it's such a cornerstone of what many of us identify as not just, Christian moral ethics,
right,
but the moral ethics of a lot of religions.
Right. It's a humanism ultimately, right? That courses through these various religions, which I, quite frankly, I think we could probably do without the religion, just go to the humanism, but that is my own thought, whatever. But yes, to your point, right? I mean, it's like, where is this call coming for more of a humanist ethos, if you will?
Yeah. So Julia Carey Wong and her Guardian piece really pinpoints this moment with Reverend Budd as this like triggering moment for a lot of, far right, I don't know.
Yeah.
For a lot of far right talking heads and evangelical kind of fringe characters. So shall we read some of the ways that they responded to this?
Let's dive right into it.
All right.
we can. I guess we can hot potato this one.
Okay, yeah, we
switch
can.
off.
So first, Christian podcaster Ben Garrett hops on and writes, "Do not commit the sin of empathy. This snake is God's enemy and yours too."
Yeah. I just want to say really quick, as a fact check, was the sin of empathy, is that in the Ten Commandments somewhere? I must have missed that.
I know, this was not in your Catholic school upbringing, for sure.
Interesting. I got the wrong book, I guess. Anyway, and then there was evangelical Joe Rigney, who said, "Bud's attempt to speak truth to power, in air quotes, is a reminder that feminism is a cancer that enables the politics of empathetic manipulation and victimhood that has plagued us in an era of wokeness. Bishop Budd's exhortation was a clear example of the man-eating weed of humanistic mercy. My God, the man-eating weed of humanistic mercy. I mean,
it's like
wow.
the bingo card of like.
Yeah. I mean, did he like type in like the Chat GPT?
I know.
Please come up with like something vile to say in the voice of, I don't know, Sheriff Joe Apile. And if he was, in an evangelical priest, and here we are. So, yeah.
And feminism is a cancer.
That is
right. That enables the politics of empathetic manipulation.
And by feminism, I think he means that any woman allowed to speak, apparently, because
yes.
I don't recall. I mean, again, it's been a while since I've listened to it, but I don't recall, Bishop Budd's speech having to do specifically anything with
feminist.
egalitarian. Yeah, exactly. It was, but anyway.
I think it was, first of all, that there was a woman bishop or reverend there.
Yes.
That was probably number one. But I think also there's been this real attempt to point empathy as a sort of female sin, right? So we're getting back to the original sin stuff, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's super messed up, but there is definitely this association of empathy with female traits. And
right.
of course, women being toxic for society as well, unless we're kept in our places, apparently.
Yeah. And I mean, with that, right, I mean, it's inferred then, or implied, that I guess psychopathy is a male dominant trait.
Yes. Yeah, I don't, yeah.
Or at least that's what I'm seeing in our current landscape here, unfortunately.
Right. So, and then we have Allie Beth Stuckley, who's the author of the book Toxic Empathy. Do you want to read this one?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't want to be confused of a feminist sympathizer by reading a powerful woman's words, but here we are. She was speaking to the NPR, and she said, they'll use emotional, compassionate, kind-sounding language in order to get a woman to think, well, in order to be a good person, in order to be kind, in order to even love my neighbor, then I have to be pro-open borders. I have to be pro-LGBTQ. I have to be pro-choice. Then, not to be outdone, J.D. Vance tries to square Catholic theology with the concept of toxic empathy and ends up being publicly rebuked by Pope Francis in a letter only weeks before he dies. Do you want to take that one on?
Yeah, I love this moment because it's like J.D. Vance enters the WWE arena and is like, let me in, guys. I have something to contribute. And his contribution is to dig up this kind of esoteric Catholic concept and then misinterpret it to justify sort of not loving your neighbor and only loving your family, basically.
Yes.
And he's so wrong and so aggravating that Pope Francis himself writes a letter about how wrong he is and basically says, Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests that little by little extend to other persons and groups. He goes on to encourage true Catholics to constantly be meditating on the love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception.
Well, I hope JD and Mel Gibson were listening on that one.
Yes.
I mean, they're both a little problematic Catholics, shall we say. Anyway.
So as someone who rebelled against my parents in high school by going to Christian camp.
Oh, yes.
And basically knows nothing about the Bible. This is about as deep as I can go.
For our listeners who don't know, you have a Jewish background, is that correct?
My husband is Jewish.
Okay.
I was raised by two very atheist parents who were horrified when I turned up at my Presbyterian church in high school specifically to piss them off.
You rebelled in the opposite direction.
100%. I was like, what can I do to make them mad? I know.
I'm glad you didn't stick it out there.
I didn't last very long.
You're like, there must be other pathways of rebellion that aren't quite like that.
I know. I was not creative as a kid. But I think we have to ask, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah.
This seems like such a weird thing to double down on, even for the far right.
Yeah, I would say, though, it's in some ways, right, it's I think they're looking at the various vehicles and instruments, in my opinion, right? They're looking at the various instruments of power, right? And it's okay, we're not going to be able to push our agenda in universities and places of higher learning. That's why they're being attacked. We're not, for the most part, going to be able to push our agenda in what you would call traditional style media, right? That's fact-checked, fact-based, and and steeped in reality. But potentially, the evangelical movement has, in recent decades, I want to say starting with like sort of the Jerry Falwells of the world, certainly moved in the camp of the quote unquote moral majority around Reagan. And it was, I know he viewed them as very much a part of his constituency, which helped him to ride to 2 terms, even. Anyway, we won't get into that. That being said, and so I think they look at it like, okay, this is an institution of power.
Yeah.
As religion has, quite frankly, been, and seemingly in time immemorial, as a way to put forward the status quo. And the status quo is, it's the Trump regime. It is like, we want to do our agenda of inhumanity, and we feel like this would be the best way to put a little gloss on it.
Yes.
And here we are.
Yeah. I mean, and the stakes of this are apparently very high for them. I mean, Musk is talking civilizational collapse, right?
Yeah.
Unless we figure out how to be more selfish. We're apparently not going to survive as a species.
I just got to say how, like, the irony of that whole thing where you could make a excellent case, probably because it's the truth, that it's selfishness that kind of got us into this problem.
100%.
From income inequality to climate change. And it's like, maybe we need to maybe reverse the whole thing that happened.
Yeah, and I try not to put on my professor nerd hat too often, but the archaeological historical record is very clear that banding together in community and finding ways to develop solidarity has probably been one of the more important things for civilizational survival.
I would say so. Right, we've evolved to actually cooperate as opposed to
So I think that part of this also just goes back to racist white Christian nationalism, right? Being the sort of reigning Christian philosophy of
I was going
America.
to actually ask you, what did you think the Venn diagram or overlap was with the lack of caring for certain groups and the overlap of the in-group being, I don't know, maybe white Christian, cisgendered, straight people, particularly males.
Yes, and also wanting our electorate to only be that, right?
Yes, that as well.
And seeing the primary threat to American politics being expanding the electorate beyond those boundaries.
Right, I keep thinking of to be quite frank with you, with the right attempting to end birthright citizenship, I could see, nothing, as my friend Vivian McCall, a reporter over at The Stranger, said, there is nothing that's alarmist at this point in time, which I happen to agree with. Yeah. But I can only envision, there being something, there being a movement to, to say, maybe we need to continue to disenfranchise, black and brown people in terms of just outright saying that they shouldn't vote, or maybe we should repeal the 19th Amendment. Where saying
I
that
don't
women
think
can
we're
vote,
that
right?
far from it. And in fact, that whole Joe Rogan, Elon Musk conversation that we opened with, that entire conversation was in the context of a longer conversation they were having about electoral politics in the U.S. and Elon Musk making some really wild claims about undocumented citizens and their right to vote. And but this is the concern, because it's a strategic concern as well for them, that the demographics of America are changing rapidly, and they are not going to be able to rule as a white Christian nationalist party unless they exclude large groups of people from the vote.
1,000%, and even with the sort of, and I think it was a bit of an exaggeration. Yes, there were obviously marginal gains in communities of color voting for Trump. I would argue that a lot of that was people simply sitting on the couch, which raised those percentages somewhat. That being said, I have to say, I remember talking to Heather Cox Richardson, the noted historian, and I am not just name dropping her for the increased SEO.
It's a good name to drop, though.
But I remember she was saying, when I was interviewing her once, she was saying that what has, if you can pinpoint times that this country was quote unquote ever great, right? It's been at the expansion of rights, right? It's been and the expansion of rights have ended up bringing us things like Social Security ultimately, and Things like, free school lunches and, things like, I know we are not quite there yet, but, expanded healthcare for folks, right? And
100%.
so anytime that there's a retrenchment, I mean, it comes, to me, I think it will revert back to almost this social Darwinism of survival of the fittest, where it's like, I mean, who does that work for, right? Other than if you are already wealthy, already affluent, or already connected, right? I mean, that's a society that is terrible for every single person except ultra wealthy human beings. And so I think, to your point, I mean, with this whole toxic empathy movement, I think in some ways it's also allows people to almost voluntarily move towards their own sort of social devastation. If you will.
Their own demise. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the large trends around climate change or the declining mortality or life expectancy, the inclining mortality, the declining life expectancy in the U.S. I mean, I don't even think as a very rich person you can truly insulate yourself from those things, right? So we're all
unless you're going to Mars, I guess. But yes,
I mean, I guess that's the plan. Side note for a different episode, I am not convinced that Mars is going to be that great to live on. So I don't know what the game plan is there, but I am not buying it.
Same.
But I think there's this fundamental truth of a lot of our history in America of, dominant white, largely white groups sort of essentially going against their own interests to deny other groups of people their rights or their entitlements. It's what happened with voting against the Affordable Care Act. It was mostly white populations who would stand largely to benefit from the Affordable Care Act, who voted against it, who refused to use it. I love to use the example in my classes of the community pools across the South. Do you know this story?
Yes.
Yeah. But basically, once communities across a large portion of the southern U.S. were forced to integrate their public pools, many communities, after fighting this in the courts for years and years, paved over their community pools and denied everyone access to them, right? Like no one had a pool then.
I mean, it actually reminds me of a story in your book, Crowded Out, where you talk about, it was tragic, but there was an individual who, he could have potentially survived had he elected to go on quote unquote Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. They are one and the same thing, but because he just couldn't for whatever reason or just didn't want to, or it was like his morals wouldn't allow him to, he essentially died because he chose death over taking quote unquote a free government handout. And it's like in its own way, that is like such a, it's almost like, that is the religion in some ways, right? This religion of superiority, this religion of, if I have to share with others, like I just don't want to do it at all, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I don't know
How dare you tell me that I am on equal footing as this other person who I've been told is beneath me for so long.
Exactly. Yeah, and God forbid we have to share the same risk pool or the same community pool or whatever it is. I don't know what kind of toxic whatever that is, but that it really points to the idea that one of the foundational myths of, I don't know, at least the last 100 years in the U.S. is that you and I are not going to have to share the same things, right? We are not going to have to share the same fate.
I've got mine, get yours. Yeah. Even if I don't have mine, right?
Yeah. And the moments when our public has voted for these more collective goods have often been in direct fight against that kind of moral ethos, right?
We'll see it, right? I mean, it's sort of poll by poll where you see when people when you sort of break out an itemized list, if you will, of would you be willing to vote for universal health care,
right,
or enhanced benefits for medical care or food stamps or what have you. Most people are like, oh yeah. But when you say, oh, this is a platform for progressives, oh no, we or what have you, right? I mean, it's almost as if we are that certain people are so trained, right, to and conditioned to like just automatically reject, something if they can see like a benefit, it benefiting, beyond just their like immediate circle of influence, if you will.
Yeah. And so that sort of persistent discomfort with seeing the other or recognizing the other, I think is fueling a lot of this moment. So we're recording this on, I think, the day after the 5-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. And what's interesting is that Ali Stuckley, one of the author of this Toxic Empathy book that we talked about earlier, she actually talks about the origins of her book as being her own discomfort with deciding whether or not to share a black square on social media. Do you remember that? Like,
I do remember that very performative gesture from folks.
Toxic performativity is another thing.
An episode for a later date, yes.
But so for what for many of us on the left was like this super cringe moment of like people doing the most performative thing possible in recognition of Black Lives Matter. For her was this like huge moment of like moral dilemma of feeling like if I post this black square, like I won't be true to myself. And if I don't post it, like I'm going to be bullied. And I think this brings us to a slightly more uncomfortable, but maybe more instructive point about empathy, which is that I think maybe we've gotten it wrong on both sides.
Do tell. Go on.
So I think that part of what may be creating this incredible polarization around empathy is that progressives also have tended to engage in like really empty, performative, very almost like get with us or you're against us sorts of gestures of empathy that actually have very little to do with the actual thing.
Right. It reminds me of, I know this is maybe a far field, but like it reminded me of right at the height of the beginning, I should say, of, the COVID pandemic, and you had the celebrities who were mainly left-leaning celebrities who were
Imagine
going on singing John Lennon's Imagine in a spliced up just cringeworthy video, and
it's so cringy.
And like I liked some of the actors, but I mean that was like could have maybe just step away, just maybe elect to not do that. Like I love Mark Ruffalo, I truly do, but my God, but yeah, to your point, it's I think empathy is, and I know many of the folks on the right say empathy is, just an emotion like any other that, sort of, you shouldn't pay attention to and it burns out. But I look at empathy as a skill, right? And as a practice, and that you need more practice in order to be deft at applying it, right?
Yeah. Where
I see empathy truly having more of an effect is in things like grace, and things like patience, right, with someone, and things like sitting through discomfort, right, with somebody who has different experiences than you, but is 99.9%, the same in terms of your genome, right? And I'll say, like, I begin this episode talking about this, this past weekend. It was my partner's son, who I call my stepson. It was his bar mitzvah, and so we had family in town, and majority of them are Jewish, obviously, and they have very different opinions amongst them about what's the atrocities that are going on in Gaza right now. And I'll say one of the things, I was actually going to save this for my 8 ounces of joy, but I'll just say it now, like being able. And maybe it's easier in family. Actually, sometimes it's harder.
Oh, no. Yeah, sometimes it's harder.
Yeah, no.
But we do it anyways, right? Like, we have to do it. Yeah.
But for them to, essentially my partner was like, this whole reason that we're here right now is to celebrate my son, to celebrate his sort of rite of passage. And if you truly love him, right, you're going to sit down, you are going to make peace and amends there, because there definitely needed to be some amends made, shall we say, with each other. And you're going to, truly like have some empathy as well for, each other in terms of, not just looking at each other as a character and reducing, each other down to your opinion, our stance about this issue. And for 48 hours, at least, it was able, they were able to do that, right? And so being able to see that in action and knowing how hard it was, and people biting holes in their tongue from, in terms of not saying things, it's God. But that is what it is. Like, empathy is what it is, I think, to be in true relation foundationally, with human beings, even ones you love, right? And so if it's that necessary in relationships where you have, foundational, you have a context of love and a context of experience, then it's that much more necessary in relationships where you don't have that context.
Yes. Yeah. And do you think it's also just getting a lot harder to do that work, even in relationships?
Yes. And I say a part of that, I think, is because of the devices that we have to entertain ourselves, right? In terms of, I guess ultimately I think social media is a net good overall, but
you look pretty unsure when you said that.
I could change my mind next week, right? But I think, net, right, being the word, in the sense of like, they are nuance destroying many times, right? Yeah. And I think nuance is where you find empathy. Nuance is where you find compassion. Nuance is where you find the ability to seek understanding in people, right? I think when you're reducing something down to 160 characters or whatever it is, that goes missing, right? Yeah. And particularly when you are you're like in a frenzy and you're just going to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, you don't have time to think. You don't have time to like put yourself in somebody else's shoes or circumstance, right?
Right.
So, yes.
And the irony of, this is, yet again, another episode that we'll have to get put on the books. But the irony of this is that the great promise of a lot of social media technology was that it was going to make us more empathetic. It was going to kind of open us up to these other experiences. And yet instead it seems to be giving us this kind of experience of like, oh, you don't agree with me, so you're invalidating my identity, which has been shaped largely through engagement with possibly not complete or not fully formed or sometimes patently wrong forms of information. And yet I also feel like we've had a series of moments over the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years that have really pushed those feelings of invalidation to the fore. Like whether it was BLM or COVID or the crisis in Gaza, like these feel like the kinds of things that break us open.
And to your point too, like, I think in some ways it's conditioning us to interact with each other as in one-dimensional ways, right? Where it's when you're, as these are sort of rage-inducing, machines as well, it's sort of like I'm interacting with somebody usually either at their very worst in terms of, they're trying to be right in an argument or trying to like talk over you in an argument, online, or you're engaging with somebody at their performative best, so to speak, right? Where they're crafting a caricature of themselves, right? For maximum attention or maximum effect. And, on either, you have these polarities where in the middle is where, your humanity actually is. Yeah. And so to me, right, there's no better way to engage or activate anybody's humanity than, quite frankly, in relationship and conversations like this one, going to see you at Town Hall Seattle or whatever, right? Whenever your next book comes out, or, shameless plug.
Count the years, Mike. But I don't know. Like you and I have talked about this a bit in the past, that it's hard to stay in relation and in conversation when someone is invalidating your survival, right? Or what you need in order to survive. Right.
Which is, and I'll say this, which is why I think the best way to go about things is trying to find, and I know it's not always easy, particularly, let's say you're a trans person who's living out in Brownsville, Texas or somewhere. And it's harder to find community. I think trying to cultivate community is what is necessary right now, right? In terms of almost a precursor to empathy.
Yes.
Is trying to find a place where you can go and, and maybe it is online in a Reddit thread. I don't know, but right. Yeah. I would suggest that if you could, it being in like seeing flesh and blood human beings where you can go and be loved up, or you can go and I know they have, I believe the organization is Braver Angels, or and which I can have mixed feelings about at times, but I do think they're great in the way of providing venues and forums for people who don't agree with each other, just because they haven't really been in dialogue with each other, and primarily primarily I want to say their sort of dynamic is Republicans and Democrats. But I mean, the basic framework I think can work for people who are willing to sit down and truly like hear each other out. For folks who are diametrically opposed about a host of issues.
Yeah. I feel you on the point about how being in community allows the nuance of our perspectives to surface in a way that a lot of social media doesn't, right?
Yeah. And I'll say when we say being community, I mean, I want to be clear that like just people are messy. So when I say being in community, I don't mean it's like perfect, right? I mean, I'm not saying that there's times you enter a community and you're like not annoyed with somebody, or you're like, effing A, this person. I mean,
taking families as a starting point for the hot mess of human contact.
Yeah. I have the stories I could tell about this weekend, but no,
we're gonna get you in trouble.
You just might. I'm gonna make sure that Danielle, my partner, does not listen to this one, or at least like cuts off at a certain timestamp. But anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the important thing too, is like people knowing how to be in community, and that is also a skill.
Yes, and also, I want to push back a little bit and return us to this concept of empathy, because I think what we're talking about is a really rich type of thing.
Yes,
that maybe is not empathy. So I want to hold on to that, but I also think that for a long time, particularly on the left, if you will, we've had a particularly kind of empty form of empathy that is very performative and happening in particular on the political stage.
Right. It's almost like the equivalent of Sheryl Sandberg's, the former, I think, CFO of Meta.
Sorry, I'm like sighing and rolling my eyes for those who are just listening.
But where her feminism, her brand of feminism was lean in, which unfortunately has led to, I shouldn't say that it's just her, obviously. But
I could say some things that I wish she'd leaned in on. I wanted to take us back in time. Oh. Because I did a bit of a like deep dive on empathy in history, or at least over the last couple decades. And I wanted to take us back first to the Clinton era. Yeah. And Clinton was famous for saying, "I feel your pain," right? And
then causing it a lot with
yes. And I don't know about you, but I was pretty young when like Clinton was campaigning the first time around, and so I actually didn't remember the first time that he was really on the record saying this. Do you remember it?
I think it was in and I don't know if I recall it or just that I've seen, the clip so many times, but where he was debating, it was a presidential debate, I want to say, a presidential town hall with George W. Bush, and then Ross Perot was also running at the time, and you had an audience member, a probably curated audience member at the town hall come up and ask a question of everybody, and George W. Bush, he sort of did his, jazz hands, oh yeah, whatever. But Bill Clinton, he said, ask your question again. Yeah. And she, asked the question, and he basically said, I feel your pain. And he looked a lot of people, including Frank Lutz, who was a political, not a political scientist, but a political wonk or whatever. He says that, I believe he said that that was when Bill Clinton
won the election. Yes.
Because people were like, oh, he empathizes with me.
Yes. Okay. So let's play a different clip, also from the 1992 campaign trail.
Do something about it. I have treated you and all the people who've interrupted my rallies with a hell of a lot more respect than you treated me. And it's time you started thinking about that. Now, I feel your pain. I feel your pain, but if you want to attack me personally, you're no better than Jerry Brown and all the rest of these people that say whatever sounds good in the moment. If you want something to be done, you ask me a question, you listen. If you don't agree with me.
So that is Bill Clinton yelling at an ACT UP protester. This is the height of AIDS activism in the U.S.
Yeah.
You know, there's very little treatment available at this time. No one is even willing to talk about it in public. This ACT UP activist sort of stands up and is heckling Clinton during this campaign rally. And that is how he responds. And he's pointing his finger and shouting, I feel your pain. Yeah. And for me, that's like such a wild moment of what this phrase is and what it actually means.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost Orwellian in some senses, right? Of like, like, you know, let me use these words and like I will give you no actual action behind it except for like my anger right now.
Yes. Yeah. And you are not treating me nice.
Yes.
Because you're interrupting me.
And also, right, I mean, just a lack of awareness of the power differential right there, right? Particularly in that time in 1992, right?
Yes.
You know, coming off the height of the AIDS crisis, which was honestly still ongoing, right? And it's like, you know, my God, right? I mean, the fact that he couldn't just, you know, he's talking about, in that particular clip, he's talking about them listening, and it's like, well, what about you?
Are you listening? Yeah. I mean, it's like a precursor of like every fight on Twitter.
Yes.
But like, I find it interesting because of that, because in some way it reveals this kind of human impulse to, you know, center oneself, but in doing a sort of nod to empathy. And I think that's part of the problem.
I wonder though, at some point of if empathy, this is what I've wondered this, like even in preparation for this episode of pondering, is empathy in some ways, does it run counter to sort of the original myth of this country, right? When you talk about Horatio Alger and rugged individualism and, you know, self-interest being sort of a key in many ways to, you know, quote unquote, what unlocked the potential of this country. It's like, I wonder, can empathy sort of coexist, if you will, with a future of this country that is sort of based on its founding ethos, in the sense of, do we in some ways need to, I don't know, just reimagine what the hell this society of America is truly for, and like how it functions and who it functions for.
But I also wonder if that's just part of the foundational myth of America that needs to shift, right? It's there. I wonder if we need other foundational mythologies, whether that's, you know, the foundational mythology of what abolitionists did to like secure the lives of enslaved people, or even the kind of like indigenous wisdom that originally shaped what was known as Turtle Island and kind of shaped community. But I don't think there's only one version of those stories. I think we have ascribed and attached ourselves to one version of that story that particularly upholds our toxic institutions, like
I know which one is winning right now.
Yeah, but like I do think that people need a mythology to attach to, right? That explains why it's worth caring about other people. And I'm not sure that empathy is it, because it's such an empty concept in some ways. Yeah,
has it been, I guess that's what I'm wondering is like, has it, I mean, and you showcased it with this clip, right? On how sort of this very barren of any true sort of meaning or action behind it with Bill Clinton. And I'm wondering, is it just that, to your point earlier about us getting empathy wrong, is it just that we haven't sort of gotten behind a true sort of form or actionable definition of empathy that would, I don't know, be animating in this society.
Or back to your question earlier, is it that we actually don't know how to use the muscles of like engaging with each other through discomfort? That's something that's more than empathy and is more action oriented and
right. Well, to your point, like where is it displayed? And like if I'm an impressionable, 16-year-old and I've just detached myself away from, like looking at, right-wing podcasters like Theo Vaughn or Andrew Tate or Joe Rogan or what have you. And I want to like, I'm listening to, we're growing an audience here. And in the meanwhile,
hopefully.
Right. And it's, folks are like, well, where do I go to see empathy in action? Like I'm almost at a loss to tell them where to view something quote unquote online or other than this podcast, which is great, of like a sort of display or even like a robust conversation that we're having on empathy, right? And so how do we inject that right into a society where it becomes the standard? Yeah,
or at least it becomes a thing that we're practicing regularly.
Yeah. Well, church might not be that, as I'm gathering. Yeah. Some churches might not be that. Not all. Yeah,
I mean, I'm also like I'm trying my best to raise a child right now, as you are.
Yes.
In what is a tough world, and I do think that there's some measure of what children are taught that is around the concept of empathy. We shouldn't hit each other because if I hit you, it would hurt you, right? And so I'm going to ask you to reflect on what that would feel like to you and use that to inform your actions in the future. So I don't know at what point we stop asking for people to have these like basic behavioral but I wonder about the institutions that train us out of that, right? Where that happens along the way.
Also capitalism, right? I mean,
that would be one of the institutions I'm kind of talking about. I mean, also to name my own institutions, I think education, right? If you look at the American model of education, it's totally individualistic. It's competitive. We teach students that there's a curve that they get graded on and it's you versus the other guy. And by the time they get to college, they're like completely frazzled and stressed out. And,
right. And it's this whole, to your point, right, this whole competitiveness. And even though I think that the word like derived from Greek is, is competus, meaning to strive together, right? And it's like that together portion somehow didn't make it over here.
Yes. Yeah. And so the strive together thing is I think perfect because I think partly what you and I are describing is not necessarily just empathy, which is the ability to say kind of in Clinton terms, I feel your pain. But more we're talking recognizing each other's humanity, sitting with the discomfort of engaging with each other's humanity, and then also trying to do something to achieve a shared goal together despite those differences.
Yes, I recall
So what's that?
I recall a Unitarian sermon, and I can't remember who did it. So forgive me, but I'm not fully anti-religion, just so people know. I do listen to Unitarian sermons every Sunday, and for folks who don't know, I know this is reductionary, but it's Unitarianism is basically atheists who like the whole song and dance of church. Anyway, but one of the things that I remember in a sermon was that this pastor said, empathy is the action of the doing of the thing. It's not, it isn't words. It's the description of the thing. It's the description of you actually sitting down with yourself, putting yourself in that person's experience, and also recognizing the fact that the privilege that you have in life, meaning for me, right, it's, the lotto ticket in life that I had, it said it was born male, right? It said it was born, semi-handsome, right? It was, you're laughing a little too hard.
No. That's the second shout out in the last 5 minutes. No.
But you see the insecurity that I have as I'm working through my own, toxic masculinity. No, but anyway, but Right, but it said, being born in America as opposed to being born, elsewhere,
Yeah.
right? And it said being born in America in 1981 versus being born in 1881, right? And being able then to apply that and say, okay, how then can I, help my, trans brothers and sisters and siblings? How can I help when I witness, right, full misogyny and patriarchy at play in the job place? How can I interrupt that, right? How can I, and then knowing that by doing that also you're hopefully having and helping people to also see where you are coming from and seeing their own benefits of life that were bestowed upon them but unearned, right? And those are acts that you engage in every single day, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully. Well, I should say those are acts that you can engage in every single day, right? As something as simple.
JD.
Well, you're right.
Are you listening? You can do this.
Secretly, he's listening on the couch somewhere, I guess. No, but yeah, it's something as simple, right, as bringing a fork to, to somebody who can't get it for themselves, right? As simple as sitting down on a couch in your, in your daughter's home to talk, to talk to the family member who y'all just had a 2-hour yelling match at each other and called each other some names that can't, be repeated. And, to be able to say, I apologize and I see truly where you are coming from, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, part of what you're also describing is the grace to allow each other to make mistakes, right?
Yes.
And to change our opinions. And I don't see that a lot, either on social media or in the Republican Party right now. Like, what would it be like for Republicans to say, you know what? Kids in cages are actually kind of bad, right? Like, we do feel things about that. And it makes us uncomfortable too. And we don't know how that parlays into politics, but we see that and we feel uncomfortable, right? And I don't know. I feel like we've created a political environment where it's not possible to give each other the grace to make mistakes either.
I really see this as being part of a project of enabling fascism. People ask, how did ordinary Germans get to the point where they were okay with genocide? How does any society get to a point where people are okay with treating their neighbors with the kind of horrific inhumanity that we are seeing, from these ICE raids and from these detentions and disappearances?
It seems like you're, in some ways, right? It's either like you're, on the left at times, I think people steer towards sort of a perfectionism that is impossible for people to match. Mm-hmm. At times where if everything isn't correct in terms of like language, in terms of like, the realization ultimately, there are some people coming into this and trying to be a part of our, this sort of progressive community, if you will, who unfortunately they're in the 101 class right now. Yeah. Right? They're not in the 301 class in the post-grad class.
Yeah.
And as long as we can recognize, to your point, right, that this is a mistake, it's not a character or a trait or pattern, and that like, as my friend Georgia McDade always says, like, I am fine with teaching. I'm not so great with reteaching, right? And so I think on the left, like at times, in terms of applying empathy, if we can locate that distinction, I think we will be so much better off.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's just, we spend so much time pushing our own out of the house, right? And telling them that they're not progressive enough or woke enough or using the right language enough to belong. And I think we do ourselves a tremendous disservice.
Right. And I'll say, right, and I will say, like, and I guess on the other side, just to equal opportunity, I'm calling balls and strikes here, as they say, like, I mean, on the other side, right, it's almost as if you can do anything is permissible as long as you adhere to X, right? And so, which, as we see, is very, very destructive at this point in time in our lives. So
So empathy should be a verb.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I like this reframing of empathy. And I think it also points us in the direction of the concept of solidarity. And I know that's something that you and I really want to explore more, whether it's building community solidarity or actually like what it looks like to act in solidarity with one another. But I think that is a huge piece of living in the meanwhile and making it count.
Right. Well, and I think living in the meanwhile, it means we have time, right? And solidarity takes time. It isn't an overnight thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to foundationally have some form of relationship, some form of community with people. And as we know, that process isn't always the most linear process at times.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And to point towards another episode that we're planning to do, we're super honored to have Dean Spade, a movement organizer, joining us in a couple weeks to talk about his new book, Love in a Fucked Up World, which is all about how we build those relationships in the meanwhile and for the world to come.
Absolutely. I cannot wait.
I know. I'm super pumped.
Yeah. Well, Nora, I think I kind of gave my sort of 8 ounces of joy a few different times in my, self-aggrandizing way of talking about how handsome I am, which, whatever. Anyway, eye of the beholder, I suppose. But I want to make sure that we get out of here with, end signing off on your 8 ounces of joy today.
Yeah. As we've been trying to do this 8 ounces of joy practice, I've been trying to cultivate my own awareness of where my joy lies. That's challenging for me. But, so to kind of speak as an academic right now, it's bad. It's really bad. We weren't really sure when we started the, winter, spring term, what things were going to look like, what was sayable in a classroom, what we were going to face backlash for. I think many of us spent the last few months just watching colleagues' life work go up in flames in many ways. So it has been a very dark time. And also, I'm about to do something that I actually hate when people do it, which is like when they get asked, like, what gives you hope? And they're like, oh, the children. And I'm like, don't put that on them. Let them be like dumb and stupid. Right. Like they already have student loans. Like, stop.
Let's not outsource that to them.
Yes. Like we created a super fucked up world for them. Like, let's not also make them save us from it. But I'm going to break my own rule here by saying that I got to experience this past spring how much the kids are not okay, but they really do have their eyes open right now. And the honesty and inquisitiveness with which my students are approaching this really hard moment, I think is really inspiring. And to remain tuned in and keep asking questions at a time like this. I can't imagine going to college right now, right? Like, I'm in awe. So they are my 8 ounces of joy this week and this whole last couple of months. And I don't know, they're angry and they're fired up and they're okay. I mean, they're going to be okay because they are those things.
Yeah. That sounds infectious. So
I hope so.
Same.
We need more of that energy, and also we need to not put it all on them.
We certainly do. A quick other 8 ounces is just the fact that you are still here in this country and we're doing this podcast. Yeah. Although you did ask about going remote in the near future, so I hope that you're not planning any. I have been
having some escape fantasies, but I think I'm here for the foreseeable future.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I will read us out. We want to thank you for listening. We want to thank our wonderful producer, Jessica Partnow. New episode drops next Friday and every Friday for the foreseeable future. Please follow us on social media, your podcast platforms of choice, and YouTube. And with that, be well. We'll see you in the meanwhile.